Welcome to my Shliach Story Hour Chssidim series. All right, Chavre. We've been discussing in the past couple episodes the history of Reb Mendel Futerfas, who his parents were, where he grew up, the fact that he was named after his father, and when he was a child was benched by the Rebbe Rashab, what he did for Parnasa, and the lengths he would go to for mesiras nefesh to give tzedakah. Eventually, he married the daughter of Sarah and Benzion Rubinson, and then Mendel and his wife Leah began to build their own Chassidische shtub. I believe we mentioned the story also, that Mendel Futerfas said that he never left the Farbrengen before it was over. He was a real Chassidische Yid. And besides for the mesiras nefesh that we heard about before, we're now going to hear many, many stories of mesiras nefesh that Reb Mendel Futerfas had when he was in Siberia. How did he get to Siberia? Well, as World War II drew to a close, at the end of the Second World War, the Russians, the communists, decided that it was time to repatriate the Polish refugees back to Poland. What that means is, during wartime, people are forced to flee from one place to another place. The Russians ended up going to Poland, and the Polish came to Russia. And everybody was all samished. Everybody was all over the place. Just to give you an idea, during the war, the Russians thought that the Germans were better than the Russians. And the people that were under German occupation thought that the Russians were better than the Germans. Both of them were no good. I'm reminded of a story of, I believe it was Rebbe the Masmid's son, together with his friend Reb Chatzkel. They were planning once to run away from a place that was under German occupation, or the Germans were coming, and they wanted to flee to Russia. When they came to the train station, there was a Yid getting off the train that was coming from Russia into this place that was under German occupation. The Yid sees two yeshiva bachrim taking the train about to go to Russia, and he says, "What are you doing here?" He says, "What do you mean? We're running away from the Germans, Yimach Shemam. We're going to go to Russia." He says, "You know what the communists are doing to anybody that's a Yid that tries to learn Torah? Nah, stay where you are. The Germans are a lot better than the Russians, Yimach Shemam." So they listened, and they stayed. Friday night, were sitting in a bomb shelter as the bombs fell over the city. And in the dark, they were able to hear how the Goyim were saying, tomorrow, the Germans, the Nazis in Yimach Shemam are going to come into town. We're going to get rid of all the Yidden. When they heard that, they got up. They ran as fast as they can to the train station. They hopped the next train going to Russia. And Baruch Hashem, they were saved. That Yid that got off the train earlier on Erev Shabbos, coming from Russia, unfortunately didn't survive the war. Both the Germans and the Russians were not very good to Yidden. As a matter of fact, they were pretty big Rishoyim and did horrible, horrible things. But because everybody was all samished, the Russians decided it's time to send anybody that was from Poland back to where they came from. Send them back to Poland. And so, starting in 1944, in Tovshin Dalet, over the next 2 years, more than 1 million Polish citizens were sent back to Poland. Now, some of the Chssidim, many of which were Russian, were thinking about possibly, getting on that train and leaving to Poland. But they figured the past couple of years was very quiet. The Russians, the communists, were too busy fighting a war, and they left the Yidden back in Uzbekistan that were practicing as Yidden. They left them alone for the most part. So they're not going to get involved. However, around 1945 in Tovshin Hay, when the communists renewed their efforts against Yidden and Yiddishkeit, then a group of Lubavitcher Chssidim decided it's time to put together a committee and help as many Yidden as we could escape. What did they do, Kinderlach? They would make fake passports. Fake Polish passports, and they would make groups of families together these people that were really Russians and Ukrainians, Chssidim, and sometimes even not Chssidim, any type of Yidden that they had the opportunity to help, they would make these fake passports that made them look and say that they were Polish citizens, and they would get them train tickets, and they would ship them out of Russia. As soon as they were out of Russia, it was much easier to go to a place that was much safer to practice Yiddishkeit. Canada, America, or even Eretz Yisrael eventually, Australia. But Kol Zman they were in Russia, it was very difficult for Yidden to live like Yidden. And so, with great mesiras nefesh and great effort, because it was very, very dangerous. If you were caught making a fake passport to try to smuggle somebody out of Russia, you would get in big, big trouble. There were some Chssidim that had mesiras nefesh, and they wouldn't just do fake passports, they even had access to real Polish passports, like we spoke about. And I think the Achana to Gimel Tammuz story about Esther, who would make real Polish passports to help people get out of Russia. Through the efforts of this committee, hundreds of Yidden were able to escape to freedom. And Reb Mendel Futerfas took a leading role. He was specifically in charge of making sure that the almones and yusaimim, the widows and the orphans, had whatever they needed to leave Russia. Reb Mendel later said that he was so farmatert, he was so iskimuchit, it took a lot of physical strength out of him to secure all the passports and the papers and the train tickets and the bribing of the Russian officers by the train stations and the people that were checking the passports to let everybody pass and to give them access to everything that they needed. Eventually, Reb Mendel Futerfas decided that the time has come for him and his family to escape also. As the days went by, it was getting more and more and more dangerous. But Reb Mendel felt very guilty leaving his work behind. I'm going to run away and save myself and my family when there are still Yidden that are stuck here in Russia. As a matter of fact, his good friend Rabbi Poltaver, Rabbi Kagan, said, Reb Mendel, look at me. Does that mean that mesiras nefesh has a gvul, has a limit? You're going to be mesiras nefesh to save all these Yidden, but up until a certain point, when it becomes too dangerous, you're going to leave? Is that what a chosid does? Are you going to leave me here to finish the job? And Reb Mendel didn't know what to do. So Reb Mendel Futerfas turned to his mother, Mariashe, and asked his mother, Mama Ziza, tell me what to do. Should I stay here and continue helping people get out, even though it's very, very dangerous? Any day the Russians, the communists can catch me and punish me for my work? Or should I leave and save myself and my family? And his mother, who was a wise woman, turns to him and said, Mendele, let me share with you what the Gemara and Bab Metzia discusses. The Gemara says, what if someone's walking along the road, it's an elderly person, and he finds something lost on the road, right? He has the mitzvah of Hashavas Aveda. But this thing that he finds is something that's either unpleasant or it's too heavy for him to pick up. Even if it was his own item that he lost, he wouldn't pick it up because it was too heavy. So the Gemara asks, is this type of person mechuyev to return the item that he found? Does he have the mitzvah of Hashavas Aveda? If it was his own thing, he wouldn't touch it. So the Gemara answers that no, if it was your own thing and you wouldn't bother to pick it up, or you weren't able to pick it up, then you do not have a mitzvah, you do not have a chiyuv to do Hashavas Aveda. However, if he already started looking for the owner, if he already started the process of the mitzvah of Hashavas Aveda, then you have to finish it. He has to see it through to the end. So Reb Mendel Futerfas' mother said to him, Mendele, since you already started the process, since you already got involved in helping so many hundreds of Chssidim gain their freedom, to be able to travel out of Russia, to be able to live like Yidden, you cannot leave until every last chosid that's within reach is able to experience this freedom. And the Eibishter will help you. And so Reb Mendel decided to follow the advice of his mother and to follow the advice of his friend Rabbi Poltaver, that mesiras nefesh doesn't have a gvul. A chosid, when a chosid goes on mesiras nefesh, he does it all the way. He got passports and tickets for his wife and his children, and he shipped them off to London. When them out of the picture, the Mendel Futerfas was now able to throw himself into his work, Yomam v'Layla, day and night, helping, securing the release of as many Chssidim as possible. Eventually, many members of the original Vad, of the original committee, left Russia, but Reb Mendel waited till the last group of refugees left. Now, the local communists were getting heavy bribes, a lot of money, in exchange for their silence. They would keep quiet, even though they knew about the secret operation, but they didn't tell anybody because they were getting money. But in the winter of 1947, in Tafshin Zion, they arrested one of the people involved of this organization. They beat him, they tortured him, they starved him, they made him such suddits, they tortured him so bad, until eventually he admitted to the interrogators what was really going on. That all these people that were leaving Russia weren't really Polish citizens. They were all Russians, and the Russian government, the communists, didn't want anybody to leave Russia. It was only due to the work of these Chssidim, Reb Mendel Futerfas, Rabbeinu Poltava, Mumasara, and others, that all these Chssidim were able to get out of Russia on fake papers and with the train tickets. Later that month, Reb Mendel and a handful of fellow Chssidim tried to leave Russia themselves with their own fake passports. They boarded the train and started to head out. And as the train was going, they overheard a conversation with some undercover Russian police officers. They were talking to each other, and Reb Mendel Futerfas and the other Chssidim heard them saying this. Look at those Chssidim sitting over there. That's Reb Mendel. He was in charge of this big operation, getting all the Chssidim out of Russia. He thinks that he got away with it. He doesn't know. He's living in his fantasy. Little does he know what's coming his way. He's never going to make it out of Mother Russia. Upon hearing that, Kinderlach, the Chssidim realized they were trapped. Sure enough, soon after, a group of armed soldiers barged into their train car. Everybody, hands up! You are all under arrest. Under arrest. Put your hands in your head. On your head, and we'll be taking you all to the police station. They were all arrested and removed from the train, taken to the offices of the secret police, where they were interrogated, asked questions, and threatened with many different types of harsh punishment. However, Reb Mendel Futerfas remained silent. He did not snitch on any other Chssidim. He did not tell the Russians what was really going on. He did not want to get anybody else in trouble. Mendel remained silent, even amongst the intense pressure. One of the things they accused him in the interrogation was, "You are Mendel! We are charging you with treason. You know what that means? You are going against this country. Because if you think Mother Russia is the best country, why would you want to live? This is such good country. We have snow in the winter and we have snow in the summer. Not always, but sometimes we could. It depends where you are in Russia. And we have no food and we have no Torah and we don't let you do mitzvahs. So why do you want to leave such a good country? If you want to leave this country, that means that you don't like it here and you want to do things against Mother Russia. Why else would you want to leave this country?" But Reb Mendel Futerfas answered, "No, actually, I have nothing against Russia. I think it's a beautiful country. I think it's very big and you have a lot of snow and a lot of other very interesting things, which I'd probably prefer not to have, but that's not why I want to leave Russia." He says, "I'm only leaving the Soviet Union so that I could be reunited with my Rebbe." Reb Mendel was a chosid of the Frierdiker Rebbe. And at that time, the Frierdiker Rebbe was already living in New York. He says, "I'm only leaving because I cannot live without my Rebbe. I'm simply traveling to America because that's where my Rebbe lives. And if my Rebbe was living in the Soviet Union like he was before, in Rostov or or even in Riga or anywhere else, I would stay. There's no other reason for me to leave. I'm leaving to be reunited with my Rebbe, because a chosid needs to be with the Rebbe. But kinderlach, the Russians did not accept that answer. They were not convinced. And a few months later, in the spring of Tafshin Zayin, Reb Mendel was sentenced to 8 years of hard work in the gulags, the forced labor camp in Siberia, far off on the edge of Russia, where it's freezing cold. Most people don't live there because it's a very difficult place to live. They took Reb Mendel, they put him on a train, shipped him far off to Siberia to work in the freezing snow. But we're going to hear in the coming episodes that Reb Mendel, although he missed his wife and children, he missed being amongst other Chssidim, he did not let the communists take away his spirit. Whenever he had the opportunity to daven, he davened. He tried to learn and tried to be mekad of other Yidden. And Reb Mendel always continued living as a chosid. And one Yom Kippur, when Reb Mendel was davening, however much he was able to daven over there in Siberia, while not getting caught, he came up to the part of Yom Kippur davening that says V'chol ma'aminim. A whole pismain, a whole part of the davening. V'chol ma'aminim. Well, all believe that the Rebbe forgives, and the Rebbe is chai v'kayim, and the Rebbe is forever, and the Rebbe is the king of the whole world. And Reb Mendel Futerfas thinks to himself, is it true that everybody believes? Does this big bulvan that sleeps in the bed next to me over here in the jail, does he also believe? As soon as Reb Mendel Futerfas thought that, he pushed those machshavas out of his head, and he says, how can I think such a thing? If this is what it says in the machzer, then of course it's true. I'm going to start asking, it says in the machzer, V'chol ma'aminim, alle glauben, everyone believes, and I'm going to say, no, that's not the case. He pushed those thoughts out of his mind and continued davening. A week later, this cellmate, this bulvan, that would sleep next to Reb Mendel in the bed over, comes over to Reb Mendel and says, is it true that you're Jewish? And without waiting for an answer, he says, I'm also a Yid. I'm also Jewish. I'm also Ivrei. And you know what? I also was davening on Yom Kippur.